By the time Che Guevara became a global icon, the world around him had changed dramatically. Political systems evolved, movements fractured, and ideologies softened. Yet one thing remained remarkably consistent: Che's own beliefs. The image adapted to the times, but the ideas behind it did not. This distinction is often overlooked. Che Guevara did not experience the transformation that his image did. His worldview was fully formed long before his death. It did not shift to accommodate popularity, cultural trends, or global reinterpretation. The man who traveled through Latin America, fought in Cuba, governed reluctantly, and died in Bolivia held the same core convictions throughout his life. Those convictions were rigid. Che believed that inequality was structural, not accidental. He rejected reform as insufficient and compromise as betrayal. He believed that power systems protected themselves through force and could only be dismantled through organized confrontation. These ideas were not symbolic. They were operational. They shaped his decisions at every stage of his life. What changed was how the world received them. As Che's image spread, his beliefs were gradually stripped of their context. The clarity he insisted upon became uncomfortable. His rejection of ambiguity conflicted with a world increasingly drawn to flexible interpretations. Over time, the image absorbed attention, while the ideology receded into the background. This process did not dilute Che's beliefs. It displaced them. The icon became approachable because it no longer demanded agreement, could be admired without being followed, displayed without being examined. In contrast, Che's actual ideas required commitment. They demanded action and acceptance of consequences. That made them difficult to integrate into a culture that preferred expression over obligation. Che did not believe in partial alignment. He viewed belief as something that required total commitment or none at all. To him, adopting symbols without adopting action was meaningless. This is where the tension between the man and the icon becomes unavoidable. The world embraced Che's image precisely because it no longer carried the weight of his expectations. In life, Che was uncompromising. In death, his image became flexible. This flexibility allowed Che Guevara to be claimed by movements that shared none of his discipline or certainty. The icon traveled freely because it no longer resisted reinterpretation. The beliefs remained unchanged, but they were no longer required to engage with the symbol. This contradiction defines Che's posthumous legacy. The world did not soften Che Guevara's beliefs. It simply learned how to ignore them. The icon survived because it no longer challenged the systems Che sought to dismantle. It could exist comfortably within them. Understanding this distinction is essential. Che Guevara did not evolve into a symbol. He was turned into one. And in that transformation, the meaning of his beliefs remained intact but increasingly irrelevant to how he was remembered. While Che Guevara's image became increasingly detached from his beliefs, the beliefs themselves remained fixed, unchanged by time or reinterpretation. This contrast grew sharper as the world moved further away from the conditions that had shaped Che's thinking. Economic systems evolved, political language softened, and revolutionary movements became fragmented. Che's worldview, however, did not adapt to these shifts. This immobility is central to understanding him. Che did not view ideology as something that evolved gradually. He believed it was refined through experience and then acted upon decisively. By the time he reached maturity, his conclusions were already settled. From that point forward, his actions were about application, not reassessment. He did not seek consensus. He sought alignment. This rigidity placed him increasingly out of step with the world that adopted his image. As Che's face became a universal symbol, it was embraced by people who often rejected absolutism. Modern movements favored inclusivity, flexibility, and negotiation. Che believed these qualities weakened purpose. To him, ambiguity was not strength. It was evasion. His insistence on clarity conflicted directly with a global culture that valued adaptability. The icon survived because it did not insist on this clarity. Detached from Che's words, the image could be interpreted as a general call for resistance, rather than a specific program of action. This reinterpretation was essential to its endurance. Had the image remained tightly bound to Che's actual beliefs, it would have been far less portable. Che understood this risk in his own lifetime. He warned against empty symbolism. He criticized movements that emphasized appearance over substance. He believed that revolution without discipline inevitably collapsed into spectacle. These criticisms applied as much to posthumous myth-making as they did to political organizing. Yet, after his death, there was no mechanism to enforce coherence. The world was free to extract the parts of Che that felt inspiring and discard those that felt demanding. His commitment to sacrifice, hierarchy, and confrontation was softened or ignored. What remained was an impression of defiance that could be consumed without consequence. This selective preservation altered meaning. Che's beliefs remained unchanged, but their representation shifted. They were no longer presented as a cohesive system, but as fragment slogans detached from structure, ideas divorced from responsibility. Over time, these fragments lost their original force. The icon, meanwhile, continued to grow. As Che's image entered mainstream culture, it encountered environments that neutralized its original intent. Commercial platforms, media narratives, and institutional frameworks absorbed the symbol without engaging with its implications. The image could be sold, displayed, and circulated without threatening existing power structures. This outcome would have deeply troubled Che. He believed that ideas mattered only if they disrupted comfort. His own life was defined by discomfort, movement, and confrontation. The symbol that replaced him required none of these things. It could exist peacefully within the systems he sought to overturn. The contrast reveals a deeper truth. The world did not misunderstand Che Guevara's beliefs. It understood them well enough to separate them from the image. This separation allowed the icon to flourish while neutralizing the ideas that gave it meaning. Che's beliefs remained unchanged because they could not change without losing coherence. What changed was the world's willingness to engage with them honestly. By the time Che's image reached its peak recognition, the beliefs behind it had become optional. Admiration no longer required agreement. Display no longer required understanding. This transformation did not dilute Che's ideology. It made it irrelevant. As Che Guevara's beliefs remained unchanged, the world around them continued to shift. Political movements that once defined themselves through confrontation gradually rebranded themselves through language, symbolism, and visibility. Action gave way to messaging. Structure gave way to expression. In this new environment, Che's ideology felt increasingly out of place. This tension explains why the image survived more easily than the beliefs. Che demanded commitment. His worldview left little room for partial participation or moral distance. He believed that taking a position meant accepting its consequences fully. This expectation conflicted with a global culture that increasingly separated identity from responsibility. The icon allowed engagement without cost. The beliefs did not. Over time, this difference reshaped how Che was taught, discussed, and remembered. In academic and popular discourse, Che Guevara often appears as a symbol of dissent rather than a practitioner of ideology. His life is summarized through moments, not systems. His failures are reframed as sacrifices. His certainty is described as passion rather than rigidity. This framing makes the story easier to absorb, but less accurate. The removal of structure is key. Che's beliefs were not a loose collection of ideas. They formed a coherent framework that governed his actions. Violence, discipline, hierarchy, and sacrifice were not optional components. They were central. When these elements are removed, what remains no longer represents Che Guevara as he understood himself. This selective interpretation creates a paradox. Che Guevara is celebrated globally as a symbol of rebellion, yet his actual beliefs would likely place him in opposition to many who adopt his image. He distrusted movements that lacked discipline. He rejected compromise as weakness. He believed that history advanced through confrontation, not consensus. The icon avoids this conflict by remaining vague. Vagueness protects the symbol from scrutiny. It allows different groups to project their values onto the image without engaging with contradiction. The more undefined the symbol becomes, the more widely it can be shared. In this sense, ambiguity is not a flaw, it is the mechanism of survival. Che's beliefs resisted this process. They were explicit, demanding, and inflexible. They required rejection as much as acceptance. They forced a binary choice: alignment or opposition. Such clarity is difficult to sustain in a world that favors negotiation and inclusion. As a result, Che's ideology became increasingly marginalized. Not because it was forgotten, but because it was inconvenient. Engaging with it required acknowledging outcomes that many preferred to avoid. The icon provided a way to bypass that discomfort while preserving a sense of identification. This shift had consequences. As Che's image became universal, its capacity to challenge power diminished. Symbols that threaten systems are suppressed. Symbols that can be absorbed are preserved. Che's image survived because it no longer functioned as a threat. It could coexist with the structures he sought to dismantle. This survival came at a cost. The beliefs remained unchanged, but they were increasingly isolated. They existed in texts, archives, and historical debates, while the image circulated freely in public space. The separation became normalized. Understanding Che Guevara today requires recognizing this division. The icon did not soften the beliefs. The world learned how to ignore them, and in doing so, it transformed Che Guevara from a figure of disruption into a figure of familiarity. This transformation was not inevitable. It was chosen. By the time Che Guevara had fully become an icon, the separation between image and belief was complete. The face endured. The ideas did not disappear, but they no longer traveled with the same force. What survived was not the system of thought Che lived by, but a version of him that could exist comfortably within the world he had rejected. This outcome reveals a central truth about how symbols function. Symbols do not preserve meaning. They preserve visibility. They survive not because they remain accurate, but because they remain usable. Che Guevara's image was usable precisely because it no longer insisted on the discipline, sacrifice, and certainty that defined his beliefs. Che would have recognized this immediately. He did not believe that ideas could be separated from action without consequence. To him, belief was meaningless unless it shaped behavior. He rejected admiration that did not lead to commitment. From his perspective, an image divorced from responsibility was not legacy, it was distortion. Yet distortion proved more durable than coherence. As Che's face spread across cultures and generations, it became familiar rather than challenging. Familiarity reduced friction. Reduced friction allowed repetition. Over time, repetition replaced understanding. The icon became a fixture rather than a provocation. This is where meaning shifted. Che Guevara did not change. His beliefs remained exactly as rigid, demanding, and uncompromising as they had been in life. What changed was the willingness of the world to engage with those beliefs honestly. The icon offered an alternative: identification without confrontation. That alternative was embraced. In this form, Che could be admired without being followed, displayed without being studied, remembered without being understood. The image survived because it no longer asked difficult questions or imposed uncomfortable choices. The irony is profound. Che sought transformation through certainty. His legacy achieved permanence through ambiguity. The man rejected flexibility. The symbol depended on it. What endured was not what Che valued most, but what could be carried most easily. This does not mean the beliefs disappeared. They remain documented, unchanged, waiting for engagement. But engagement requires effort, and effort resists convenience. The icon flourished because it demanded nothing. The beliefs remained because they demanded everything. Understanding this distinction is essential to understanding Che Guevara. He was not reshaped by history. History reshaped how it used him. The world did not soften Che Guevara's ideology. It simply learned how to live without it. In the end, Che Guevara became an icon not because his beliefs changed, but because they did not. Their rigidity made them difficult to carry forward. The image replaced them not by contradiction, but by omission. This is the final paradox of his legacy. Che Guevara became one of the most recognizable figures in modern history. His beliefs remained unchanged. The meaning did not, And in that difference lies the clearest lesson of all, that history does not preserve what is true, but what can survive being repeated.